Great, thank you very much. It's actually, yeah, it's great to come in to join you. Okay, so I'm going to go into it. The hard task of having 5 minutes or so to talk a bit about my Desert Island Dharma, I believe. And so I've kind of, the way I've approached it is quite literally in a certain way. You know, I imagined myself on a desert island, a bag full of Dharma, as is to be expected with myself, maybe a few texts carrying around. I watch a few of them wash out to sea, and I reach and grab one of them instinctively, cling on to one of them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about maybe what would be my inclination, why would I grab this particular text, and maybe in a short amount of time evoke a bit of the spirit of it. So that's how I've approached it. And it's interesting, when I was thinking about this, it would actually be probably the same choice for me for a while now. And when I was approaching this question now, something that seemed to be relevant, something that was kind of live for me at the moment, seemed to connect with this text. So something that's been live for me at the moment, a live reflection of mine, and in a way a kind of a recurring experience of mine at the moment with the Dharma, is something like this, something in my mind like this. So it's something that goes like, no motivation, no energy. No energy, no transformation. No transformation, no Dharma life. That's something that's been around for me at the moment. That's something that's live. So the choice of my text, the choice of my Dharma teaching would be something that I find inspires and guides. So if I was alone on an island, and I suppose similar to when I'm alone in my private moments, off an island, I believe both of these are required. So I need inspiration and guidance. I personally find motivation in trying to live out what I call the heroic ideal. And to that end, I would cling to a text that I regard as the Dharma Warrior's Handbook. And that text is called the Dhammapada, the Way of Truth. You can imagine me reaching out, no, grabbing it, clinging onto it, swimming ashore. So I've only got a brief amount of time, as I say, to talk about the Dhammapada. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk about the reasons why I find it motivating, inspiring, attractive even as a text. And then I'll read out a few verses just to give you a bit of a flavour of it. Okay. So the first thing is the Dhammapada, I find, is quite clear and straight to the point. It can be pretty punchy or uncompromising. So it suits my character to a T in that regard. So one of the verses I'm going to read to you is the verse on a section on mindfulness, verse 21. Mindfulness is the way to the immortal, unmindfulness the way to death. Those who are mindful do not die, whereas the unmindful are like the dead. So that's got a bit of a punch to it. And at the same time, I resonate with that. You know, my life, if I go around in quite an unmindful state, I sometimes feel like that, like the dead. The other thing that I find that resonates or that touches me through the Dhammapada is it's straightforward, it's clear, and at the same, it's quite profound. So what's this way to the immortal? Those who are mindful do not die. What does that mean? So there's a lot to go into. The Dharma is quite radical. It's got quite a radical message to it. So another verse in the section of pairs, version 5. Not by hatred are hatreds ever pacified here in the world. They are pacified by love. This is the eternal law. So it's quite radical. It's quite a radical way of reacting to everything in the world, especially reacting with hatred is quite strong. The Dhammapada of the text, it includes many wonderful images, metaphors, and similes, which I find engage both my imaginal faculty and my emotional life quite fully. And here's two, in a certain way, seemingly contradictory modes of being, which I find actually go together quite well and live out what I was referring to as the heroic ideal. So here's a section on the mind, verse 40. Perceiving the body to be fragile like a clay pot, fortifying the mind as though it were a city, with the sword of wisdom make war on Mara. Free from attachment, keep watch over what has been won. So for me, quite an active mode evokes, as I say, the Dharma warrior for myself. But then there's a contradictory section on the flowers. Verse 49. Let the silent sage move about the village as the bee goes taking honey from the flower, without harming colour or fragrance. So two very different modes, and I feel like leading a Dharma life, I need to embody both those modes. I was particularly thinking of my name, Kamalavajra, Lotus Vajra. It's all included, quite evocatively. So I feel the Dhammapada engages with the full range of the human experience. The sections range from mindfulness and the mind, through to sections on happiness and anger. Then the enlightened one to the elephant. I think I'll leave you hanging, pondering how that one, how those two hang together. So the Dharma, it doesn't leave out any part of the human experience. And that's something which I found very motivating. It was something I was looking for before I come across the Dharma. The Dhammapada encaptures that in its many verses and images. And maybe a last verse before I conclude, something a bit maybe on the theme of Desert Island Dharma, of kind of maybe more and more and less of less, this kind of theme. There's a section on the thousands, verse 101. Better than 1,000 meaningless words collected together is one meaningful line of verse, on hearing which one becomes tranquil. So I'd just like to conclude in trying to evoke in a certain way the opposite of my initial live reflection, in which I believe the Dhammapada would serve me very well on my desert island. So something in the reverse would be like this. With motivation comes energy. With energy comes transformation. With transformation comes living out the Dharma life.
Thank you, Kamalavajra. Thank you so much. And in fact, that verse you finished with from the Dhammapada is definitely one of my Desert Island Dharmas. Yeah, the thousands. Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Great.
And in case you haven't got the chat box open, Tim asked which version of the Dhammapada Kamalavajra was referring to. He's using Bante's translation, Sangharakshita's translation of the Dhammapada. And I've just put a little link. And Prajnamati's got the same exactly the same copy, not the same copy, the same edition. And there's a link to the Windhorse website where that book can be found. So great. Thanks so much, Kamalavajra.
No problem.
And now I'm going to hand over to Prajnamati, who also seems to have a copy of the Dhammapada, but I happen to know there's a bit more going on as well. So over to you, Prajnamati.
Okay. Well, my piece of Desert Island Dharma, which is the one I'm carrying in my mind more than in a book, is the 4-line summary of the Mahamudra. So this is something I learned from Vasantra on retreats. So it won't take long to read the entire 4 lines. Here it is. Appearances are mind. Mind is empty. Emptiness is spontaneous presence. Spontaneous presence self-liberates. So I was going to spend the rest of the 5 minutes sort of unpacking that a bit. And actually there's a very good segue from the Dhammapada, because the opening verse of the Dhammapada is experiences are led by mind, preceded by mind, of mind made. Which is the same as the first line of the 4-line summary, really. Appearances are minds, because appearances is a way of saying experience. It's what is apparent to our sense perception. And yeah, so they're kind of led by mind, preceded by mind, but they're also made up of mind. So the mind-only school of Buddhism has this lovely visual image of the ocean and the waves. So the mind is like a great ocean, and appearances are just like the waves on the surface of the ocean. They're the agitation of the water. They're kind of stirred up. So it kind of conveys the fact that appearances are in some way involved with something we're doing. So they're kind of, sometimes it's said that they're fabricated, that they're confected, that they're contrived. And in relation to that, mind itself, which is synonymous with awareness, isn't obviously identified in this sort of activity. So in relation to that, mind in itself is more unfabricated, unconfected, uncontrived. Yeah. So you might have heard of some retreats on the theme of uncontrived mindfulness or uncontrived awareness. So if you can kind of make that transition from a level of awareness that's just wrapped up in the senses, so that all you're actually aware of is the immediate content of experience, to be more aware of the quality of awareness itself. So this is our distinctively human capacity, that not only are we aware, but we can be aware that we're aware. Then that quality of awareness itself isn't wrapped up in the senses. So that's in a way the first step of the spiritual life. And there's some lovely practices which kind of move you towards this quality of awareness. So one in particular is like relating to all experiences arising, and they're just impressions in awareness. Yeah? Everything that appears is just an impression and awareness. Just an impression and awareness. It moves you into more spacious experience. But then mind is empty. So lots of ways in which you can take this. I think the one that kind of I find most sort of immediately helpful at the moment is that there's nothing personal in awareness. You know, so my quality of awareness, it's not an English awareness. It's not a male awareness as opposed to female awareness. It's not any particular age. It's not a 57-year-old awareness rather than a 3-year-old awareness. You know, it doesn't have an occupation. It's not an engineer's awareness rather than an artist's awareness. It's just awareness. You know, and actually everything that I might relate to as being distinctively me is not a quality of awareness. You know? So it's not something that I can hang on to as me. It's not personal in that way. But also, even the qualities that we associate with awareness, say spaciousness, for example. Well, space, size is a sort of relationship between experiences. You know, how far is it from this to that? But as the mind stills, then those waves gradually settle down. And one way of describing that is like a fading. There's a fading out of appearances. And when there's nothing tangible there to measure by, there's no basis. by which to say that awareness is contracted or expansive. Similarly, there's no basis for which to say that awareness has a knowing quality once there's nothing. Once there are no kind of ripples on the surface that you can kind of know, once there's no particular experiences there to know. So even the quality of awareness itself is, in the end, the mind is empty of that. And then, well, each step of the four-line summary gets in a way more remote. It's like a path, and it finishes with liberation. So there's less. There's, in a way, it's more difficult to say anything about the later parts. But just a couple of things about emptiness is spontaneous presence. So it's particularly useful if we have a rather nihilistic take on emptiness. Particularly, it used to be translated as the primal void, and no longer is. It's useful to think of it more as a positive quality of suchness. Viveka, in a recent podcast, described it as withness, the quality of being with, which I rather like. So spontaneous presence has this sort of quality of presence, of suchness, of withness. And finally, spontaneous presence self-liberates. So this is when the whole experience of appearances arising like magical illusions is kind of known in its nature. The nature of appearances being the nature of mind, being the nature of emptiness, being the nature of spontaneous presence. Then they just liberate themselves in the same moment. So there's this line from the Life and Liberation of Padmasambhava. It arises and liberates in the same moment. It arises and liberates in the same moment. Yeah. So that's kind of a description of where you get to. So in a way, I find that more kind of inspiring than just the absence of greed, hatred, and delusion. Experience is still manifest, it's still unfolding, it's still arriving, but it arises and liberates in the same moment. So that's my little four-line summary for you.
So I was just thinking about our Desert Island Dharmas we've heard so far and what we're going to hear next. And you may know, or you may like to know, that the Dhammapada is a very, very early Buddhist text. It's said to be as close, in language that's as close to the language that the Buddha spoke as we can get. So it's very early. It's likely to have come into being around 500 BC, before Common Era, and was written down a few hundred years after that. Prajnamati's just been talking about a Mahamudra text, which is connected with the Tibetan tradition. Buddhism came to Tibet around the 8th century with Padmasambhava, who Prajnamati mentioned. And I'm going to be handing over now to Advayamati, who I think is going to be talking about somebody who was born in 1685, if I remember correctly. But I'll leave you to hear what Advayamati's got to say about him. So over to you, Advayamati.
Okay, people haven't said what luxury item they would take on the desert island, and I used to think that my luxury item would be some very soft toilet paper, but these days it's more likely to be unending amounts of chocolate. Okay, so I'm going to pick out Hakuin. And I'm probably in the minority of order members who has a kind of propensity, a leaning towards Zen, as opposed to quite a lot more into the Tibetan school. Hakuin is quite a traditional, if you like, Zen master, in that he was a great practitioner and therefore expressed great understanding, which came from this. As well as a great calligrapher and artist, and there are some outstanding paintings that he's done, and some of them I was very lucky to see. Well, it wasn't luck, because that's not a Buddhist concept, is it? But I created the conditions to see them at the art gallery in Los Angeles, where it's just wonderful. Anyway, so he is also attributed with a very famous koan, and koans, if you're not sure are kind of riddles which attempt to take you beyond the rational mind and open you up into your own direct experience. And the one that he's famous for is the sound, what's the sound of one hand clapping? And if you want further guidance on that particular koan, there is an episode of The Simpsons which goes into this in more detail. So so this story that I like very much is said to be from his lifetime, and so it is part of his biography. So he became, like many Zen masters, the head of a famous monastery, and his teachings became very well known and well respected, and had many disciples. And so at one point he lived in a villager hermitage, and there was a food shop which was nearby, run by a couple and their young daughter. And one day their parents discovered that their daughter was pregnant. So angry and distraught, they demanded to know who the father was. And at first the girl was reluctant to say, and then eventually she named Hakuin. So the furious and angry parents confronted Hakuin, berating him in front of all his students, and then presented him with this baby. And his response was, "Is it so?" It's traditionally translated, "Is that so?" But I find "is it so" actually more kind of useful for my own practice. And so this resulted in him losing his reputation and many disciples, but Hakuin wasn't particularly disturbed by this. He took delight in caring for this infant, and did what was necessary. And so about a year later, after many moments and times that the mother experienced great regret, she confessed that actually it was another young man who worked at the local fish market, it says, we can explore the relevance of that or not, who was indeed the father. So the mortified parents return to Hakuin and were extremely apologetic, begged his forgiveness, and for the wrong that they had done him, and his reply was, "Is it so?" And so they asked for the return of the baby, and so he gave it up, and there you go. That is the story. And it's a story which I still find it very, very inspiring. And if I was to really stay in the Zen tradition, I'd leave it there. But I do like to talk, and I'll give a few pointers. And I suppose what's always attracted to me, the Dharma to me, is this idea that it encourages us to question things, and that rational aspect is very important. But also important is to test things through your experience. Yeah. And to also open up to what the unexpected may provide for us. And we've seen that recently. How do we respond to the unexpected? How do we open up and develop a sense of equanimity? And in a way, the story is a love story, but without a particular object of love. It's the love of, this is a quote here, the universal embrace of every situation without judgment. It illustrates a particular type of practice which takes us beyond attachments and sense of self. It's a treatise on mindfulness, on stillness, simplicity, and contentment in practice. And also a pointer to not get too attached to rites and rituals and projections, and really opening up to presenting reality and what the joys that can bring and the benefits. Another koan that I like is, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. So it helps us to see how we resist presenting reality and how that can lead to conflict and reinforcing the subject-object dichotomy. Hakuin also did another commentary on the Heart Sutra. It's a brief one, so I like it. Written by Hakuin, edited by Hunger and Cold, revised by Cold and Hunger. So a final one of his poems, the Song of Zazen. Boundless and free is the sky of Samadhi, bright the full moon of wisdom. Truly is anything missing now? Nirvana is right here before our eyes. This very place is the lotus land. This very body, the Buddha. Thank you.
Thank you, Advayamati, for that koan of a Desert Island Dharma, giving us the universal embrace of every situation without judgment. And if you meet the Buddha on the road, then kill him. And yeah, and really lovely to hear those words from Hakuin's Song of Meditation, which Ratnavandana read for us a few weeks ago on Sangonite. You can catch that whole poem on our YouTube channel if you want to hear the whole of it. It's beautiful. Yes, thank you very much. So, yeah, we've been moving through time, as I was saying, and now we're actually going to move out of time altogether. So I'm going to hand on in a moment to Suryadaya, and she's going to share with us the heart of the perfection of wisdom from the Heart Sutra. Well, I'll leave her to tell you, but you'll understand why it's entirely appropriate that she's last, very much not least, but it was fitting to conclude our Desert Island Dharmas with this. So over to you, Suryadaya.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, good. Yes, it was a strange coincidence, wasn't it, really, that unfolded that way. I was really, really affected by those three offerings. Wonderful. Yeah, I chose the last line from the Heart Sutra. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhisvaha. I chose that. I chose it partly because recently, well, just prior to the lockdown, I was suddenly sort of spirited out of Bristol to my daughter, who went into labour quite rather unexpectedly. And as a result, I went with very little. I went with just a few bits of clothing. And I ended up spending lockdown without any books, without my computer, without any props. So in the times between changing nappies, I was thrown back on myself. You know, what can I turn to sustain me here in my practice, in my quiet moments? What Dharma do I carry with me all the time in my heart? I'm not somebody who can remember great chunks of Dharma, but I do remember it was the Heart Sutra. It was the Heart Sutra that immediately came to mind. And over the weeks of lockdown, I recited it in my mind many, many times, many times. Repetition is powerful. Sometimes I thought about it deeply and reflected on the meaning of every line. And sometimes I just sort of let it wash over me. But it's this last line, it's the last line, which has always touched my heart, or perhaps my heart-mind. There's something about it that just landed in a different place and always left me at the end of the Heart Sutra, as I'm sure it does many of us, in a different space. And for a very long time, I didn't understand it. I didn't know what the literal meaning was. I didn't need to, and I didn't particularly want to. I just knew that it was a call, it was a summons. So literally, it means gate, gate. Gate means gone. Gone from what? Gone from suffering to the liberation of suffering. Gone from forgetfulness to mindfulness. Gone from duality to non-duality. Gone from samsara to nirvana. Paragate means all the way to the other shore. It's that image of the lake again that comes so frequently in the Dharma. Such a beautiful one that resonates with us all so strongly. Gone, gone, gone all the way to the other shore. Another translation that has always spoken to me, though, is leap, leap, leap beyond. There's something about the word leap, the sort of sense of upward movement into the air, away from the gravitational pull of everything that holds us back. I love leap, leap, go beyond. Gate, gate, paragate. Parasangate means everyone, all of us, the entire Sangha, the whole lot, top to bottom. This is not going to happen alone. This is going to happen for all living beings. Everyone beyond, everyone to the other shore. And on the other shore, Bodhi Swaha, Bodhi, the light, the inner light, the light inside, enlightenment, awakening. And then this glorious Swaha, which is it's somewhere between welcome, hallelujah, hurrah, yippee, all of them. It's just a whoop of relief and arrival, joy. So in a way, I suppose, the Heart Sutra for me presents or tells us where all the teachings of the Dharma will ultimately lead us. It describes or attempts to describe another reality beyond all the things that we must let away, all the bonds that cause us suffering. And at one level, I read it as that, as a set of guidelines, reminders, instructions even, that, you know, there are no sense experiences, there is no consciousness, and then the relief that there is no ignorance or all that comes of it, no death, there is no pain or cease in pain or noble path to lead from pain. And at the end of it all, there's not even attainment, there is shunyata. And then at the end of all that, there's this mysterious sort of marvelous, magical clarion call. And in a way, I chose it also because it kind of sums up my week. I haven't been studying, or I haven't studied hard and deep for quite a long time, really. I'm fascinated by how the Dharma manifests in our lives. I'm fascinated by looking at emotion and psychology and how it can guide us and lead us. It's quite a time since I've actually got down to, you know, sitting with the survey and reading it page by page and jumping into that. And I was amazed at how much I just so greatly enjoyed it, especially sharing it with a very lovely group of people who were as keen as me to go there. But it brings us back to the beginning and to what Satyalila said at the beginning of this session, and something that Prajnamati reminded us of on the first day of our study, which is that the purpose of study is to use our intellectual minds to light the spark of real understanding. But that understanding is not a rational intellectual understanding. It is an apprehension of something which is ineffable, mysterious, and not knowable only in the mind. Gate, gate, paragate, parasangate, bodhisvaha. Leap, leap, go beyond, means to me everything from the very tiny, tiny things which are holding me back right now, the trivia, the preoccupations, the petty irritations that seem to fill my screen, but are so, so, so tiny. Right from that, right through to the other end of going beyond to the other shore of enlightenment, which is what we're all trying to do when we study the Dharma, when we practice ethics, when we meditate, all of it. That's what we're trying to do. So a very good place to finish a week of very fascinating and enlivening Dharma discussion, and much appreciation to the people that shared that with me. And appreciation to Satyalila for asking me at the last minute to step in and do a study group, which I hugely enjoyed. And it's led me to this particular place, which I'm very moved to share. So that's me.